In the graying dawn of the St. Louis animal shelter, where concrete kennels echoed with barks and whimpers, a white dog trembled by the open door of an old van. Her coat, once pristine like fresh snow, was now matted and caked with street dust and dirt, clinging like memories of abandoned nights. A volunteer, a man with tired eyes and gentle hands, parked his van by the rusty gates, where the wind whispered through the fence. He opened the back door, spread out an old blanket that smelled of home, soap and warmth, and stepped back to give her space. "Come on, sweetie," he whispered softly, not pushing, just offering. His voice was like a gentle rain after a storm. The dog froze at the edge of the asphalt, her paws shaking as if the ground might give way. Her deep brown eyes, with that spark of betrayed trust, darted from the van to the horizon, where the city of Chicago was waking up in the mist. She remembered other cars, shiny sedans of owners who would pull up with promises of food and affection only to drive away, leaving her on a rainy roadside. Her white fur stood on end from the penetrating cold, but the fear was deeper. It was in her bones, in every heartbeat that echoed in the shelter's emptiness. The barks of the neighboring dogs quieted as she got closer, as if they knew her story. Found by a dumpster with a puppy's trusting look that shattered with the first dropped bone. She took a step. Her nose touched the edge of the seat, inhaling a foreign yet not hostile scent. A mix of gasoline, coffee, and something alive, human. Her paws slipped on the metal, her body tensing, ready to jump, but a memory flashed. The last car where her owner had stroked her head, whispering, "Good girl." Then the door slammed shut, and the engine roared away, leaving her on the highway in a downpour. The dog flinched, her paws scraping the asphalt, leaving marks like scars on her soul. The volunteer didn't move. He just crouched by the wheel. His breathing was steady, an anchor in the storm. He knew dogs like her, broken by trust, trembling with ghosts of the past. The shelter around them went about its business. Workers carried bags of food, water dripped from a faucet, and in the distant kennels puppies wagged their tails, still unaware of pain. The white dog circled the van, her nose touching the bumper, ears flat, tail tucked. Her body, thin from days of hunger, trembled not just from the morning chill. It was a fear that pierced every strand of fur, making her muscles seize. She hopped closer. Her front paws landed on the edge of the door, her body curving in an attempt to jump in, but her gaze fell on the empty seat, and panic washed over her. What if it was a trap? What if the door closed, leaving her to solitude again, to the street with its hunger and cold? She jumped back, her paws giving way, and she whimpered softly like the wind in the cracks. The volunteer held out a hand, not to grab, but to show his palm empty of threat. "I'll wait," he said, and his tone had a warmth that seeped through the frost like the first ray of sun. The shelter slowly came to life. Birds perched on the kennel roofs, their chirping mixed with the city's sirens, and the smell of wet earth after the night's rain hung in the air, mingling with the scent of kibble. The white dog approached again. Her breathing quickened, and vapor puffed from her mouth like smoke from a dying fire. She half jumped in. Her back legs dangled in the air, claws scraping the metal, a sound that echoed in her soul. But fear won. She slipped down, her body hitting the ground with a thud, and she scuttled away, trembling harder, her fur damp with dew. The volunteer wasn't angry. He simply took a dog biscuit from his pocket, placed it on the seat, and moved back even farther. His eyes, full of patience, watched her like fragile glass about to break. She circled the van, her nose touching the wheels, smelling the traces of other dogs he had driven away, those who had found a home. Her white fur picked up dust, turning gray like her hopes. But deep in her eyes a spark glimmered, one that hadn't been extinguished even on the darkest nights. The shelter buzzed with noise. Kennel doors squeaked, workers called out names, and she stood alone, trembling by the van, fighting herself. To jump in meant to risk, to trust again. But fear whispered, "Don't trust, they'll abandon you." The volunteer waited. His silhouette in the dawn looked as steadfast as an old tree in a storm. The dog took another step, her paws shaking, but she didn't retreat. The wind brought the smell of rain, and the shelter came alive with shadows. Cats meowed in a corner. The dogs in the kennels pushed their noses to the bars, while the volunteer sat motionless. His breathing was in sync with hers. The white dog crept closer, her nose touching the blanket, warm and soft, like a forgotten embrace. She tensed, her muscles coiling, and she jumped, hanging in the air for a moment. Her heart drummed like a drum, but fear struck. She imagined the door slamming shut, the van driving away, and she jumped down with a yelp, stumbling on the asphalt. Her paws splayed, her fur bristled. The volunteer didn't stir. He only smiled faintly. His eyes said, "I'm here, no rush." The shelter surrounded them with a wall of sounds, barks, footsteps, the clang of bowls, but for her the world had narrowed to this van, to this choice. She circled, trembling, her white fur fluttering in the wind like a flag of surrender. One more attempt. Paws on the edge, body up, but the memory of betrayal, an owner who left without a look back, made her slide down. She sat, whimpering softly. Her eyes met the volunteer's, and in them was a plea, "Don't leave me." He nodded as if he understood. And time stretched like a shadow at noon. The sun rose higher, gilding her white fur, making it almost luminous through the dirt. The dog approached again, her nose nudging the door, inhaling hope. She jumped, and for a moment she held on, paws on the seat, her body balanced. Fear whispered, but she didn't jump down right away, clinging, trembling all over. The volunteer held his breath. The shelter fell silent, as if waiting. She hung between the past and the future, white as a clean slate, ready for a new story. In the morning light of the shelter, where the shadows of the kennel stretched like the fingers of forgotten memories, the white dog froze at the edge of the van, her paws digging into the asphalt like roots in dry soil. Her fur fluttered in the wind, white with gray streaks of dirt, and every gust brought an echo of the past, the smell of rain on the roadside where she had waited in vain. The volunteer sat motionless. His palm was open, not intrusive. His breathing was steady, like a river flowing past rocks. She lunged. Her muscles tightened, her body darted upward, her front paws landing on the seat, claws digging into the blanket soaked with someone else's warmth. For a moment she hung there, her nose inhaling the biscuit left like a beacon. But an image flashed in her mind. The door slams shut, the engine roars, and she is alone again in the downpour. Wet fur clinging to her bones. She flinched sharply, her paws slipping, her body hitting the ground with a dull thud that echoed in the shelter where other dogs had gone silent, listening. She scuttled back, her tail tucked, ears flat, her eyes darting to the volunteer. A shadow like a cloud over the sun flickered in them. He didn't move, only his gaze softened. His hand remained where it was, inviting her without words. The shelter bustled around them, the squeak of doors, the splash of water in bowls, a distant bark. But for her the world had shrunk to this chasm, a leap into the unknown where trust could break like a fragile bone. She circled the wheel, her nose touching the rubber, inhaling the scent of tire marks that had carried others away, and fear squeezed her chest. What if it was like before, when her owner turned her back without a second glance, leaving her on the highway with the honking of cars? The dog shook her head, her fur a white wave in the gray air, and lunged again. Her paws pushed off the asphalt, her body arcing, her back legs dangling, clinging to the edge. She inhaled, feeling the warmth of the seat under her paws, but the memory hit. The cold asphalt in the rain, water streaming down her face. Mixing with tears, dogs can't cry. But the pain was the same. She slid down, her legs giving way, and she sat whimpering softly, like the wind in the fence cracks. The volunteer leaned in slightly, not to grab, but simply exhaling warmth. His eyes mirrored her trembling, but in them a spark glimmered, like a star in a city night sky. The shelter lived. Birds flocked to the roof. Their wings flapped, mixing with the footsteps of workers carrying food. She stood, her paws shaking, her white fur damp with dew, and approached again. Her nose touched the bumper, inhaling metal and hope. A sharp, desperate jump. Her body soared. Her paws grabbed the blanket, claws digging in. She froze at the edge of the seat. Her breath hitched, but fear whispered, "They'll abandon you again." And the image surfaced. An empty street, a hungry ache in her stomach, paws running nowhere. She jumped down, stumbling with a yelp, her body rolling on the asphalt, leaving a trail of dust. The volunteer reached out slowly, his fingers touching the air, not her, giving her space. His posture said, "I'm not leaving." The shelter surrounded them with a wall of sounds. Cats meowing in a corner, the clink of chains, water dripping from a faucet like tears. The white dog circled the van, her paws tapping on the concrete. Her tail twitched, her ears caught every rustle. Fear sat in her like a thorn in her paw. But in the volunteer's eyes, something warm flickered, like a fire on a cold night. She stopped, her body tensed, and jumped again. Front paws on the seat, back in the air, balancing on the edge. She inhaled the scent of the biscuit, felt the softness under her claws, but memory struck. Abandoned by a dumpster, puppy eyes full of trust shattered by reality. She slipped down, her paws hitting the ground. She scuttled away, trembling all over, her fur bristling. The volunteer sat, his breath an anchor, his eyes a lighthouse in the fog of her fears. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain, and the shelter came alive with shadows. Dogs in the kennels pushed their noses out. Workers called out names, and she stood, white in the gray, fighting the shadow of the past. One more lunge. Her muscles coiled, a jump, paws on the blanket, her body still. Her heart pounded like a drum in the silence. Fear whispered of betrayal, but she lingered longer, her nose touching the biscuit, inhaling warmth. The volunteer smiled faintly without moving. His presence was a wall against the storm. She hung there on the edge, her white fur trembling, and deep in her eyes a spark flickered. Not fear, but something else, timid, like the first step into the unknown. The sun rose, gilding her fur through the dirt, making it almost luminous. The dog jumped down again, but softer. Her legs didn't give way. She sat closer to the volunteer, their eyes meeting. In her gaze a plea, in his a promise. The shelter hummed, barks subsided, footsteps faded, and time stretched, giving space for the struggle. She circled, her trembling subsiding slightly, a white shadow in the morning light, and fear, though tenacious, began to melt like frost in the sun. The sun climbed higher, gilding the rust on the shelter fence, where barks were replaced by rare sighs, and the shadows of the kennels shortened, as if retreating before the warmth. The volunteer sat crouched by the van's wheel, his back straight, his hands on his knees. His gaze was fixed on the white dog, whose fur caught the rays flashing through the dirt. He didn't call out, didn't reach a hand out, just waited. His breathing was steady, like a metronome in the silence, where every shiver of hers echoed in his chest. The shelter breathed around them. A kennel door squeaked, water splashed in a bowl. A bird flapped its wings over the roof. But he didn't stir, allowing the wind to whisper between them, carrying the smell of wet earth and the distant city. The white dog froze 3 feet away. Her paws dug into the asphalt, her ears twitching at the rustle of leaves sliding on the concrete. She glanced at the van's open door, where the blanket beckoned with its softness and the biscuit lay untouched, its crumbs sparkling in the light. Fear squeezed her, her body swayed, but she didn't retreat. She circled closer, her nose touching the bumper, inhaling the scent of metal mixed with his coffee soap calm. The volunteer lowered his gaze to the asphalt. His fingers clenched his knee, but a shadow of a smile, barely noticeable, touched his lips. He knew this dance, 1 step forward, 2 back. The echo of broken promises resonated in her shadowed eyes. The wind brought a cool breeze ruffling her fur, a white wave in the gray yard, and she took half a step. Her paw froze in the air, her claws scratching at nothing. The shelter came alive with sounds. A worker walked by, dragging a bag of food. The smell of kibble spread, making her stomach rumble. But she wasn't distracted. Her eyes were on him, this motionless figure who didn't chase or grab. The volunteer exhaled slowly. Vapor drifted from his lips, his posture like a rock in the storm of her doubts. He remembered others. A puppy with a broken paw who would bite from fear, an old mutt who trembled in the rain. He had waited for all of them, for hours, for days, until trust grew like grass through cracks. She circled the van. Her tail twitched, her ears perked up slightly, catching the silence of his waiting. The sun warmed her back, dispelling the morning chill, and she stopped by the door. Her nose touched the edge of the seat, inhaling the warmth of the blanket. The volunteer didn't lift his head, but from the corner of his eye, he watched her body relax. Her muscles released their tension, her fur settled. The shelter went quiet. Barks died down, footsteps faded, leaving them in a bubble of time where the wind swirled dust by their paws. He moved a finger, not towards her but just to stretch. Yet the gesture echoed, "I'm here for as long as it takes." The white dog sat, her paws tucked under her chest. Her gaze slid over his face. The wrinkles by his eyes, traces of exhaustion, but in them was a warmth like fire in a hearth. She tilted her head, an ear twitching, and stepped closer. Her nose touched his shoe, inhaling leather and salt. The volunteer froze, holding his breath, allowing the moment to stretch like a spider's silk in the wind. The shelter was a wall around them. Cats meowed in a corner. A dog in a kennel sighed, but their world had narrowed to this waiting. His patience, her timid approach. The sun rose, gilding her fur, making it almost clean. And she didn't retreat, just sat, absorbing the silence. The wind died down, bringing the smell of distant rain, and she stood. Her paws tapped on the asphalt, her body swaying towards the van. The volunteer nodded, barely perceptible. Their eyes met. In her gaze a flicker of hope. He waited on. His back was straight, his hands calm as a still lake. The shelter lived. Birds flocked, chirping. Workers called out names, but he wasn't distracted. His focus was on her, on this white shadow whose fear was slowly melting. She circled closer with each pass. Her tail twitched up, her ears pricked. The sun grew warmer, driving away shadows, and she froze by the door. A paw rested on the edge, her body tensed. The volunteer exhaled softly. The vapor dispersed. His presence was a wall against the cold of the past. She hung on the edge, her fur trembling, but she didn't jump down. She lingered, inhaling the air inside the van. The shelter fell silent as if holding its breath, and time flowed more slowly, giving space for trust to grow. The sun climbed over the shelter fence, bathing the yard in gold that broke through the dust and rust, turning the dog's white fur into a shining halo, even if it was dirty. She stood by the van, her paws rooted to the asphalt. Her nose touched the edge of the blanket, where the scent of the biscuit mixed with the warmth from the seat. The volunteer sat motionless, a statue carved from patience. His eyes, two warm lakes, caught her gaze, neither demanding nor rushing. The shelter around them lived its own life. The squeak of a kennel door, the splash of water, the distant bark of a puppy. But their world had narrowed to this open door, to her trembling, to his silent promise. The wind died down, leaving a silence where only her breathing could be heard. Rapid, ragged like a drum before a leap, the white dog swayed forward. Her ears twitched. Her tail froze, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising, taking in not just the biscuit but something living, human, that didn't smell of betrayal. Fear clung to her like a burr in her fur. The image of a slammed door and a roaring engine flashed in her memory, making her paws tremble. But the volunteer didn't move, only the corner of his lips lifted, like a ray of light piercing a cloud. His stillness was an anchor, his gaze a bridge over the chasm of her doubts. The shelter buzzed. A worker passed, clanging buckets. Birds chirped, but she didn't look away, absorbing his calm like parched earth absorbs rain. Her paw went up, claws scratching the metal. She swayed, her body tensing, ready to lunge. The memory struck. The cold highway, wet fur. An owner walking into the shadows without a look back. The dog froze, hanging on the brink. Front paws on the edge of the seat, back paws in the air, balancing between fear and hope. The volunteer held his breath, his fingers clenching his knee, but he didn't move, letting her choose. She exhaled. Vapor puffed from her mouth like smoke from a dying fire. And in that moment something clicked inside. Not fear but a spark, faint but warm like a coal glowing in ash. The shelter fell silent, as if sensing the moment had arrived. Barks subsided, footsteps faded. Only the wind rustling as it touched her fur. She gathered herself, her muscles tensed, and she lunged upward, a sharp, desperate jump. Her paws hit the seat, claws digging into the blanket. Her body slid forward, her back paws followed, and she was inside. For a moment she froze. Her chest heaved, her eyes darting to the volunteer, expecting a trick. But he only nodded slowly, as if the world had turned in her favor. Her white fur trembled, but the shaking subsided, replaced by a warmth that spread from her paws to her heart. She stood on the seat, her nose touching the biscuit, but she didn't take it, just inhaled as if tasting hope. The volunteer moved for the first time, slowly raising his hand not to her, but to the door, holding it so it wouldn't slam shut. His movement was as gentle as a leaf falling on water, and she didn't flinch, only her ears twitched, catching the sound of his breathing. The shelter came alive again. A dog in a kennel barked. A worker shouted something in the distance, but their bubble remained. She was on the seat. He was by the door. Between them a thread of trust, thin but strengthening. The sun warmed her through the glass, gilding her fur, and she stepped forward. Her paws softly flattened the blanket, leaving dirt smudges like a signature on a new beginning. The volunteer smiled wider. His eyes shone, reflecting her silhouette, a white shadow that had decided. He didn't speak or break the silence, but his posture, slightly relaxed shoulders, open hands, said, "You did it." The dog shook her head. Her fur ruffled and settled. She curled up, her nose tucked into her paws, inhaling the warmth. Fear still whispered. The door might slam shut, the van might drive away to nowhere. But the warmth of the blanket and his gaze, soft as moss, muffled the whispers. The shelter surrounded them. Birds returned, their wings flapping. The smell of kibble floated in the air. But she didn't move, just breathed, soaking in the moment of peace. The sun rose higher, its rays piercing the dusty glass, and her fur began to shine, almost clean despite the dirt. The volunteer waited. His breathing was in sync with hers, like two hearts beating in unison. She lifted her head, their eyes met. In her gaze a shadow still, but with a glimmer of light. In his a pride like for a child who took their first step. The shelter lived, footsteps, barks, the clang of bowls, but their world was here, in this van where she had decided, where fear had retreated, leaving room for something new. The sun's rays pierced the dusty van window, caressing the white fur of the dog lying on the old blanket, curled into a tight ball as if protecting herself from a world that had so often betrayed her. Her chest rose evenly. The trembling that had shaken her body at the shelter gates subsided like waves after a storm. Her nose was tucked into her paws, inhaling the warmth of the fabric, steeped in the smells of home, soap, coffee, and something subtly alive that came from the volunteer. He sat behind the wheel, the engine still off, his hands resting on his knees. His gaze glided over her in the rearview mirror, soft as a cloud's shadow, neither demanding nor pressing. The shelter outside the window dissolved in the morning light. Barks were replaced by rare sighs. The creak of kennels fell silent, and only birds chirped, circling over the rusty fence. The white dog stirred, an ear twitching, catching the sound of his breathing, steady like the tide washing ashore. She lifted her head. Her deep brown eyes, with the spark of past pain, met his reflection in the mirror. Fear still smoldered, a coal in the ash, whispering of slammed doors and the roar of tires driving away. But the warmth of the blanket and his stillness muffled the whisper. She stretched a paw, her claws gently scratching the fabric, and lay down again, uncoiling her body, allowing herself to dissolve into this moment. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no trembling, no waiting for a blow. The volunteer smiled faintly, his fingers stirring but not towards the keys. He simply adjusted the mirror, letting her see his eyes full of quiet pride. The van was an island in the sea of the shelter, where the sounds, the clang of bowls, the footsteps of workers, a distant whimper, bounced off the walls without penetrating inside. Her fur, white but touched by street dust, caught the sun's rays, flashing like snow under the moon. She inhaled deeply. Her nose caught the crumbs of the biscuit still on the edge of the blanket, but she didn't reach for it. Not out of hunger, but out of a desire to preserve this piece, fragile as glass. The volunteer sat silently. His presence was like an old tree that stands in the wind, neither bending nor breaking. He knew dogs like her, broken by betrayal, with eyes that had seen too many goodbyes, and his silence was a promise. I'm not leaving. Not ever. The wind outside the window brought the smell of wet earth mixed with smoke from the distant city. But inside the van the air was warm, saturated with her breathing and his calm. The dog turned her head, her nose touching the edge of the seat, inhaling metal, fabric, his scent. Not a threat but reliability. She stretched out a bit more. Her paws relaxed, her tail twitched, for the first time not tucked but free like a flag in a gentle breeze. The shelter lived beyond the glass. A worker passed by dragging a bag. Birds flocked, their wings flapping. But their world was here, in this silence, where her heart beat more evenly, syncing with his breathing. She closed her eyes, her eyelids heavy as a curtain after a long play. Memory still whispered. The cold asphalt in the rain, the hunger that gnawed at her ribs, the shadows of people leaving without a look back. But the warmth of the blanket in his gaze, soft as moss, muffled these shadows. She sighed, her chest rising, and the sound of her breathing merged with the van's silence, creating a melody of peace. The volunteer stirred slowly, so as not to startle her. His hand rested on the steering wheel but didn't turn the key. He waited, giving her time to dissolve into a safety that, for the first time, didn't feel like a trap. The sun climbed higher, its rays piercing the glass, gilding her fur, making it almost clean despite the dirt. The shelter buzzed. A dog in a kennel barked. A worker shouted something in the distance, but she didn't flinch. Only her ear twitched, catching his breathing. The volunteer leaned in slightly, not touching her, just exhaling. The vapor dispersed like a wisp of smoke. Her eyes opened slightly and met his. In her gaze a shadow still but with a glimmer of light. In his a warmth like fire in a hearth, not burning but comforting. She lay down more snugly. Her nose nestled into the blanket, and for the first time in a long time, her body didn't tense, anticipating a blow. The van stood still, the engine silent, and the shelter around them seemed distant, like a memory. Her fur fluttered in a gentle draft, but the trembling was gone, replaced by a warmth that spread from her paws to her heart. The volunteer watched her in the mirror, his eyes saying, "You are safe." She inhaled, her nose touching the biscuit, and she licked a crumb, not out of hunger, but as a taste of a new world where food isn't snatched away and warmth doesn't disappear. The shelter fell quiet, as if sensing her peace, and time stretched, making space for this fragile but real moment. The van moved, its engine a soft purr, like distant thunder that doesn't frighten, only reminds one of life. The white dog lay on the back seat. Her fur, worn from the streets but still catching sunbeams, trembled slightly with the van's vibrations. She raised her head, her nose buried in the edge of the blanket, inhaling its warmth mixed with the scent of the biscuit and the volunteer's calm. Her deep eyes, with the shadow of past storms, slid to the window where the shelter dissolved into a haze. The rusty fence, the kennels, the barking, all receded like a dream that melts at dawn. The volunteer drove slowly, his hands on the wheel firm but gentle. His gaze in the rearview mirror touched her like a light breeze, not demanding but simply reminding her, "You are here, it's okay." Outside, the city of Chicago came alive. Cars honked, pedestrians flitted by like shadows, and traffic lights blinked red. But inside the van was its own world, quiet, warm, where her breathing synced with the engine's hum. She stretched out on the blanket, her paws relaxed, her tail twitching, for the first time not tucked but free, like a leaf swaying on a branch. The sun pierced the glass, gilding her fur and making the dirty spots almost invisible. And she watched through the window as houses gave way to trees and asphalt to the green of parks. Memory whispered. Cold nights by the dumpsters, hunger gnawing at your ribs, footsteps of people leaving without a second glance. But the warmth of the seat and his gaze in the mirror muffled the whispers, like a river washing away tracks in the sand. The volunteer was silent, only occasionally glancing in the mirror, his eyes a lighthouse in her fog. He turned the wheel, and the van swayed gently, turning onto a narrow street where old houses with peeling paint stood beside flower beds. She followed the movement, her ears twitching, catching sounds. A distant honk, children's laughter, the rustle of leaves. The shelter was left behind, its echo of barks and creaking kennels dissolving into the city's noise. And for the first time she didn't flinch or wait for a blow. Her nose touched the glass, leaving a damp smear, and she inhaled the air coming through a crack in the window, fresh with a taste of grass and freedom. The van slowed at an intersection. The traffic light blinked yellow, and the volunteer turned his head, his voice soft as the blanket. "We're almost there, sweetie." She trembled, her ears perked up, but not from fear, from the sound of his voice, which was like a warm hand stroking her back. She lay down more snugly, her body melting into the seat, her fur fluttering in the sunlight. And in her eyes a spark flickered, not a shadow of the past, but a glimmer of a new day. The city outside the window flowed by, storefronts, hurried people, a dog on a leash wagging its tail. And she watched, not looking away, as if the world were opening anew without chains or kennels. The volunteer turned on the radio. A quiet melody played, a guitar as soft as his breathing, and she tilted her head, her ears catching the notes. The van turned into an alley where trees intertwined their branches over the road, creating a green tunnel, and sunbeams danced on her fur, turning her into a painting white with patches of light and shadow. She inhaled deeper. Her nose caught the scent of flowers from a garden behind a fence, and for the first time, her tail twitched not from anxiety but from curiosity. The volunteer smiled into the mirror. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel to the rhythm of the melody, and she felt the beat of something more than the engine, like the heartbeat of a new journey. The city gave way to the suburbs. Houses became lower, gardens wider, and the air outside the window smelled of grass, not asphalt. She lifted her head higher, her eyes following a sparrow that flew over the road, and her paws stirred as if wanting to run after it, but the blanket held her like an embrace. Memory still whispered. Dark alleys, hungry nights, footsteps fading into silence. But the van's warmth and his gaze, soft as moss, muffled these shadows. She licked a crumb of biscuit still on the edge, not from hunger, but as a taste of this world where food isn't snatched away and warmth doesn't disappear. The van stopped at a traffic light, and she looked at the volunteer. His profile, lit by the sun, was calm as a still lake. She sighed. Her chest rose, and the sound of her breathing merged with the radio's melody, creating a harmony of peace. The city outside grew quieter, fewer cars, more green. And she watched as the world changed, as her life maybe was also changing. The volunteer turned his head, their eyes met. In her gaze there was still a shadow, but with a glimmer of light. In his, a warmth like fire that heats but doesn't burn. She lay down, her nose buried in the blanket, and for the first time her body didn't tense, waiting for an end, only a beginning. The van slowed, tires crunching on gravel, and the engine fell silent, leaving a stillness that rang in her ears like the echo of a distant bark. The white dog lay on the back seat. Her fur, still touched by street dust, caught the soft light filtering through the green tunnel of trees. She raised her head, her nose twitching, inhaling the new air. Not asphalt and gasoline but grass, flowers, and something alive like the breath of the earth. The volunteer turned, his hand slowly resting on the door handle. Their eyes met, his warm as coals in a hearth. They didn't rush, they called. "We're here, sweetie," he said softly. His voice was gentle as a leaf falling on water. She stirred, her paws tensing, but not from fear, from a curiosity that broke through the shadow of the past like a sprout through a crack. He opened the back door and sunlight streamed in, gilding her fur and turning the dirty spots into patterns, like a map of her travels. The dog stood, her claws scratching the blanket. Her tail twitched, not tucked but alive like a branch in the wind. She stepped to the edge of the seat, her nose extended, inhaling the smells, wet earth, distant campfire smoke, the faint scent of kibble carried on the breeze. Outside the window lay a new shelter. Not the one they had left behind with its rusty kennels and echoes of whimpers. This one was quieter. Low wooden buildings surrounded by grass, flower beds by the fence, and somewhere in the distance a bark, not desperate but almost joyful, like a greeting. The white dog froze on the edge, her paws balanced, her eyes gliding over the yard. A green lawn dotted with daisies, an old oak tree whose shadow fell on the path, a pair of puppies chasing a butterfly by the porch. Memory whispered. Slammed doors, footsteps fading into the night, the cold asphalt against your ribs. But the warmth of the blanket and his gaze, soft as moss, muffled the whisper. The volunteer stepped back, giving her space. His shoes crunched on the gravel, and he crouched down, his palms open like an invitation. She inhaled deeper, her chest rising, and took a step. Her paw touched the edge of the van, her claws scratching the metal, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes burned, soaking in the new world. The shelter lived its own life. A woman in a blue apron came out of a small house, carrying a bowl. A reddish-furred dog nudged its nose into her hand. Birds chirped, circling the oak. The white dog jumped down, her paws landing softly on the gravel, and she froze, her body tensed, her ears pricked, catching every sound. She glanced back at the volunteer. His silhouette in the sunlight was as reliable as a rock, and she stepped forward. Her nose dropped to the ground, inhaling the grass mixed with the scent of other dogs. Not threats, but life. Fear still smoldered like a coal in the ash, but curiosity burned brighter. Something in this place, in the rustling leaves, in the sun's warmth, whispered of a beginning, not an end. She circled the van, her paws tapping on the gravel, her fur fluttering in the wind, white, almost luminous despite the dust. The volunteer walked behind her slowly, not getting closer. His steps were like the rhythm of her breathing, steady and calming. She stopped by a flower bed. Her nose nudged a daisy, the petals tickling, and she sneezed, shaking her head. For the first time, not from cold or fear, but from something light, almost playful. The shelter surrounded her. A puppy barked, a woman laughed, a door slammed shut, and the smell of food floated on the air, teasing her empty stomach. She looked at the volunteer, their eyes meeting. In her gaze there was still a shadow, but with a glimmer of light. In his, a warmth like fire that heats but doesn't burn. The sun warmed her back, dispelling the morning chill, and she moved on, her paws stepping softly on the grass, her tail twitching as if testing the air. She went around the oak tree, its shadow covering her, cool but not frightening, and stopped, looking at the open door of a small house where another dog, a black one with a shiny coat and a wagging tail, flashed by. Memory whispered. Dark alleys, footsteps fading into silence. But his presence, his steps behind her, muffled the whisper. She turned her head, her nose touching the grass, and she inhaled deeper, feeling fear dissolve like dew in the sun. The volunteer crouched beside her, not touching, just exhaling. Vapor dispersed in the air. His eyes said, "You're home." She shook her head, her fur ruffled, and stepped towards the porch, where the woman in the apron smiled as she noticed her. The shelter lived, barks, laughter, the rustle of leaves. But their world was here, in her cautious steps, in his quiet support. She stopped at the threshold, a paw frozen, her eyes gliding over the yard, greenery, sun, life. For the first time her heart beat not from fear but from a premonition of a new path opening before her, white as a clean slate, ready for a new story.